we're going to look at some examples of estimating using rounding with decimals. So when we're rounding using decimals and estimating, we always want to round to the largest place value or whatever is most convenient for that given problem. Sometimes it'll specify how to round, but usually it won't, so you're just going to estimate whatever makes the most sense in that particular problem. So if I were trying to estimate 8.890 plus 15.98, both of these are pretty close to whole numbers. If I were to round 8.89 to the nearest whole number, it would be 9. 15.98 is pretty close to 16. So I can think of this as 9 plus 16, which is 25. The next one I'll round to the nearest whole number, 2. So 9.243, the ones place is right here. So I always look at the digit to the right, which is a 2. That tells us to round down. So this is going to be 9 plus 13.64 if I'm rounding to the nearest whole number. Again, I look at the ones place. And 6 tells me to round up. So this is 9 plus 14, approximately. And that's going to give me 23. Next one is 32 minus 29.75. So 32 is already a whole number. So I'm just going to leave it. I could round it to the nearest tens place and make it 30, but then we'd have 30 minus 30, which is 0. And I know the answer to this isn't 0. So I'm going to round to the ones place. Now, 29.75 to the nearest ones place, or whole number. Here's my ones place. Look at the digit to the right, which is a 7. That tells us to round up. So this is similar to 32 minus 30. And that leaves us with 2. Part D is only looking at decimal numbers. Nothing is in the ones place for either of these numbers. There's a 0. So I'm going to round each of these to the tenths place, just because if I were to round both of these to the ones place, I would have 1 minus 1, which is 0. And that doesn't really tell me a very good estimate of this difference here. So I'm going to round to the nearest tenths place. So I'll do my circling and underlining. Since I'm rounding the nearest tenths place, I circle the tenths place, underline the digit to the right. So this 8 tells us to round up. So this is like 0.9 minus, let's round this one to the nearest tenths place, 2. So I'm going to circle the tenths place, underline the digit to the right. 8 tells me to round up, so this 5 is going to become a 6. So I have 0.9 minus 0.6, which I can do in my head. That leaves us with 0.3, or 3 tenths. Next, I'm going to work with a product. So I'm multiplying these two decimal numbers together. And I'm going to round before I do it, because this might be a little tricky to do in your head. So I'm going to round these both to the nearest whole number. 7.89 would round to an 8. 4.01, or 4 1/100th, is pretty close to 4. So I'll round it to 4. So 8 times 4 gives me 32. And that's a pretty good estimation. Next, I have a division problem, so my answer is going to be a quotient. And again, I'm going to round to the nearest ones place. So here's my ones place. The 6 tells me to round up. So this, well, you know what? That might be a little bit tricky to do in my head, because this is going to be 105 divided by 20. So when you have a question like this, this is one where it might be convenient to round to a different place value. Maybe I want to round to the nearest tens place for this 104.66. So if I circle my tens place, look at the digit to the right, I've got a 0. The 4 tells me to round down, which means leave this alone. So this is pretty close to 100 if I round it to the nearest tens place. 20.1 round to the nearest tens place is 20. And that I can do in my head a lot easier than if I were to do 105 divided by 20. So 100 divided by 20 is 5, because 20 goes into 100 5 times. Okay, now we have a story problem. So since it's fall, this might be fitting. So it says, suppose you go to Blake's Cider Mill to have a day of fall family fun. You buy 2 dozen donuts, $6.99 per dozen. 1 dozen is for Miss Divozzo. a gallon of apple cider for $4.25, a bag of apples for $11.30, and a giant pumpkin for $8.79. You bring everything to the register, and the cashier charges you $41. Using estimation by rounding, does this seem like a reasonable price? Well, let's estimate, just to get an idea of if the cashier is charging us a reasonable price. So I bought 2 dozen donuts, $6.99 per dozen. So $6.99, if we round it to the nearest dollar, is pretty close to $7. And I have 2 dozen. So I have 7 and another 7 for donuts. And then a gallon of apple cider is $4.25. So if I round that to the nearest dollar, or whole number, that's 4. A bag of apples for $11.30. Again, I'm going to round to the nearest dollar, which is like the ones place. So this 3 tells me to round down. That's pretty close to $11. And then a giant pumpkin for $8.79. So if I round $8.79 to the nearest dollar, I get $9. Now I can add these up in my head. Well, 11 and 9, I know that's going to make it 20. And then 7 and 7, that's a double, that's 14. So 20 and 14, that's 34, plus 8, $38. So maybe they charged a little bit too much based on our estimating, but it's pretty close. But so this is a way to kind of see if you're being charged the right price or not. And in this case, it looks like the cashier charged a little bit too much, so you might want to question that. Because based on our estimating, we got $38.